So we have my friend Jackie back on. She's been with us as a presenter before, so I'm very excited to have you back. Hi, Jackie.
I am so happy to be back. Thank you.
Thanks for coming. And I feel like you've been really diving into this particular topic. So I think anybody that has never heard of this polyvagal theory is going to be mind blown today and how it applies to their caseload and the children that they work with. So the title of this presentation is called Beyond Fight or Flight: Paradigm Shift Through the Lens of Polyvagal Theory. And we'll dive into what that all means as we move along. But let's go ahead and share our bios. I'll let you go first.
Yeah, so I am a late diagnosed neurodivergent mama of two. I have certifications in sensory, somatic trauma, and speech language pathologist and social emotional coach. I am passionate about educating adults relative to the neurodiversity affirming movement through the lens of polyvagal theory. And I give parents, educators, coaches, and clinicians tools to confidently create sensational connection with not only their child, student, or client, but also with themselves and by becoming aware of their sensory and somatic profiles.
Amazing. And my name is Vanita Lipak. I go by she, her. I'm the host of the Speechy Side Up podcast. I have a passion for AAC and literacy. I've spoken at various conferences. I've co authored the Lou Knows What to Do book series. And when I'm not being an SLP, I enjoy playing tennis, having tea parties with my toddler, and trying out new restaurants.
I love that.
What do you like to do for fun with your family?
Yeah, we like to ride bike and try to make that like part of our routine. Now my son is super into fishing, so we've added that to the mix. And
That's awesome.
my daughter does gymnastics, my son does football, and just really trying to get outside, you know?
Yeah, I love that. Definitely keeping busy with both kids and all the activities.
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
want to share your financial disclosures first and then I'll go after?
Yeah, so I am the owner of Create Yourself Co. LLC, and I am a part-time employee at Broward Public Schools. And so I am being compensated for this presentation, right? I'm supposed to add that. And I am now a board member of Tassel Learning, which I'm so proud to say, and receives no compensation as a member of the board and also a member of ASHA.
Amazing. And I have ownership interest in Speechy Side Up LLC and Tassel Learning LLC. I'm also an affiliate for Simple Practice and Meaningful Speech. And I am a member of ASHA as well.
Mm.
Okay, so here's our agenda for today. So we've already done some introductions and background. Then we're going to jump into polyvagal theory and what that actually is. Then we'll talk about how to reframe behaviors. And then we'll talk about co-regulation and providing safety, some different connection strategies, and we'll wrap up with some references and closing remarks. So we hope that by the end of this presentation that you'll be able to describe three basic principles of polyvagal theory and its relevance to understanding behavior, define two adaptive survival responses in children and explain how they differ from maladaptive behavior, list two key components of co-regulation and strategies to foster a sense of safety in therapy sessions, and identify two therapeutic techniques that promote safety and connection to support communication development. Okay, so let's talk about this topic that you have really been diving into the last couple of years. What is it and how does it relate to speech language pathology?
Yeah. Polyvagal theory to me has been the missing link to better understand my own children, to better understand my clients, and to better understand myself, like our own behaviors, right?
Mhm.
So, what is polyvagal theory? It emphasizes the role of the autonomic nervous system, especially the vagus nerve, plays in regulating our health and behavior. It was developed by Stephen Porges, and the theory describes the physiological and psychological states which underlie our daily behavior, as well as the challenges related to our wellness and mental health. So, by applying polyvagal theory to our personal lives as well as to disciplines such as education, speech therapy, we can understand how safety, co regulation, and connection are paramount to the healthy human experience. So this is the definition from polyvagalinstitute.org. It is multi complex in that we're going to talk about the three principles of polyvagal theory, but really and truly, Dr. Stephen Porges did so much research, decades and decades, and he discovered, and he doesn't say discovered because it's always been within our human like organism as mammals, but before in the nervous system world, it was just like fight or flight or rest and digest. And what he's saying is that there's this third pathway that the vagus nerve has more than one, not just rest and digest, but it's also for regulation. And he calls it ventral vagal. And then freeze, and then there would be dorsal vagal. So there's two, like poly meaning more than one, meaning wanderer from the brainstem all the way down to all of our organs. And
Mhm.
so that's what polyvagal theory came about, that it's not just the reptilian like freeze, but also that mammals, our biological imperative is to co-regulate and connect. And the vagus nerve has everything to do with that. So interesting. It just makes sense, right? It just
Yeah.
now all like makes sense, like the root cause.
Yeah. I'm wondering how many people watching this have actually heard of this before. If you've
Yeah.
heard of polyvagal theory, let us know in the chat. Or if you have never heard of it and this is new to you, let us know too, because I would be really curious.
So cool. So these are the three key principles of polyvagal theory. And so really and truly, it's our behaviors, the outcomes of our physiological state is automatic. That's what the autonomic nervous system means. And so there is a hierarchy that Deb Dana put together, which is a therapist who brought the clinical applications to the therapy world. And together they opened up the Polyvagal Institute. But so think of it as a hierarchy. We're going to talk about the three autonomic nervous system states in the next slide, but just know that this, through the process of the evolution, the mammalian autonomic nervous system has three repertoire of three principal states, which is, like I had mentioned, the ventral vagal, which is our social engagement system. Then it's the sympathetic, fight or flight. And then it's dorsal, which is like life threat. So if our fight or flight behaviors aren't successful, then we go to dorsal and we kind of shut down. But these are all automatic, happening at the subconscious level, which is like that's where like the bread and butter is, right? That's how we shift our lenses is, oh wait, so they're not doing that on purpose, right?
Mhm.
And then the second key principle is neuroception. And this is a term that Dr. Stephen Porges coined, because if we use the word perception, then there's an intent, right? So neuroception means that it's happening at the subconscious level. It's the regulation of the autonomic nervous system involves a built-in surveillance system involving the higher brain structures that dynamically and continuously interpret information regarding risk that is being transmitted via the sensors throughout the body. So it's constantly like our alarm system, like, okay, threat or safety. It's like bing, ding, ding, threat, threat, alert, alert, right? And it's like happening at a subconscious level. Like we're not even aware. We're not thinking about this, right? There's no cognitive thinking in this process. And so from this matrix of sensory information, our nervous system is constantly discerning risk without involving the thinking parts of the brain. That's really important. And so the last key principle is co-regulation. So we naturally and unconsciously send signals of safety or danger to each other, which either encourage or discourage the reduction of psychological and physical distance that operationally defines social engagement behaviors. And so polyvagal theory explains how this occurs through our social engagement system, which is our ventral vagal. And so on a physiological level, neural pathways are emerging from the ventral vagal complex, right, in the brainstem, calming our reaction to the threat while simultaneously enabling like our facial expressions, our head movements, and our vocal intonations that then let others know that we're safe, right? We are safe to communicate with one another. But again, if we're in our sympathetic fight or flight, or if we're shut down, if we're in dorsal, we can't even access our social engagement system. And that's
Mhm.
where communication comes in, right? So it's good to know about this hierarchy because otherwise they can't access their thinking brain for communication if their neuroceptor is perceiving or not perceiving. He says to use the word detecting because it's not intentional threat or safety, right? If they're detecting threat, then they can't access their social engagement system. But
So, what if somebody is like not feeling well or they're ill? Like, where does that put them in this hierarchy?
at least for me, because I was sick last week,
Yeah.
I was in dorsal.
Okay.
I was in dorsal. Like I could not get up from the couch. I
Mhm.
could not socially engage. Luckily, my husband was not sick, so he was able to be the primary parent. But yeah, I was like in life threat. Like I couldn't even fight because I was just really sick.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. Good to know. And then I've never really heard of neuroception, but of course, co-regulation gets tossed around a lot. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that as well. But it makes sense that, like, what happens is sometimes unconscious. So I'm wondering how an adult is able to help a child co-regulate if they have this neuroception going on and are being triggered themselves. Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
Yeah, yeah. And I call this a duet
Mhm.
because, and we'll talk about this later, but I've had to use analogies to bring in like my music background to better understand because Dr. Stephen Porges says in order to co-regulate, we just need to dip a toe in ventral. Like, for example, when my children are dysregulated, I feel that dysregulation like my own, being a highly sensitive person. So we're going to talk about blended states, I think, in the next slide.
Mhm.
And so there are blended states where we are feeling that sympathetic energy, right? And we just have to dip a toe into ventral in order to be able to share that ventral energy in to co-regulate. Because if we're just in sympathetic, also, like that saying, a dysregulated adult cannot
Right.
regulate with a dysregulated child, right?
Right. Mhm.
But I put co-regulation in that blended state of feeling sympathetic with a little bit of ventral. We just have to have enough ventral in order to share our ventral with the dysregulated child.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll talk more about that.
Yeah. It's right here actually. So this is found on the Polyvagal Institute. And before they shared, they had a ladder. Do I have a ladder up here? My background.
No, I don't think so.
No. So the top one is the ventral vagal, and I love that they characterize it by our physiological state and also the emotional state. So, we have a normal heart rate and a normal muscle tone, and we're feeling relaxed, engaged, curious, creative, hopeful, right? And then we're going to go to the next part, which is then the yellow, the mobilized. And so that would be our sympathetic state. And so that's characterized by increased heart rate, blood pressure is increased, we have hormone flow and an increased muscle tone, and we might be feeling energetic, active, playful, motivated when we're feeling safe. But if we're feeling unsafe, we'll feel like that fight or flight, stressed, anxious, fearful emotion. And then we have the third one, which is the dorsal vagal, which is when we're immobilized. So that's why I chose dorsal because I was so immobilized when I was sick. But that's characterized by a low heart rate, low muscle tone, low energy. When we're feeling safe, we could like snuggle with our kids, right? blissful, dreamy, tranquil, meditative. But when we're feeling unsafe, we'll feel depressed, unhappy, lonely, hopeless. This is where addictions are born. And so those are the three main states. And then we have the hybrid. So Dr. Stephen Porges puts play in the hybrid state with ventral and sympathetic. So dance, basketball, right? Sports, tennis, like performance, where we're feeling that good mobilized energy and ventral. So, and that's where our flexibility is born too, like controlling, okay, like when we're playing, like even he uses the example of like two dogs playing and like they know not to bite, right?
Mhm.
So that's how you know like whether or not they're mobilized in fight or flight or if they're mobilized in play. Um,
Mm.
and then the hybrid for um, immobilization and ventral, like dorsal and ventral, would be that's when we are able to hug our children and watch TV, those quiet moments, intimacy, even. And then there's also a hybrid state with fight or flight and dorsal, which is, yeah, freeze, that freeze state. And then it's not here, but there is a new state in his new book where he came out where a blended state of all three is now called appeasement.
Mm.
And
Mm.
so it's, you're feeling fight or flight, you're feeling a little bit of like dorsal, but your social engagement system is still on. And personally, I call that neurodivergent masking. But
Mhm.
appeasement, it's like goes back into the trauma world. It's like, why is this person showing love towards their predator or whatever? Like, and it's because their nervous system is in a survival state. They need to in order to survive that environment, that maladaptive environment, right?
Mhm.
And so, yeah, these are the autonomic nervous system states which are happening automatically without us even becoming at the subconscious level. We're not even aware. So this is where the shifts in lenses come in, and knowing from the polyvagal lens that our nervous system's primary job is to protect us.
Mhm.
And so that's what it's doing in these three principles.
Got it. No,
Yeah.
this is a very helpful visual. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So, what is the difference between like maladaptive behaviors versus adaptive survival responses?
Yeah. So Dr. Stephen Porges talks about how these responses are adaptive survival responses. It's not intentional behaviors, right? And so, through the lens of polyvagal theory, we see behaviors as adaptive, as unintentional, happening automatically at the subconscious level. So, all three physiological states, or even including the blended one, all seven are adaptive because they are driven by our survival instincts to move our body into a safe place when we don't feel safe. So that's where neuroception comes in. Even though there's not a tiger in front of us, our nervous system is detecting danger. And that's individualized to the person's nervous system. And that's where, as external co-regulators, we have to become attuned to what's not being said, right? Like the conversation between nervous system to nervous system. And so maladaptive behaviors are when our lenses, right, are seeing behaviors that are done with intention, with consciousness. Like it is when the environment is maladaptive that adaptive survival responses take place. So it's the environment that's maladaptive, not the child. And I think
Mm.
that's the biggest reframe. And I love that you use the word reframe here because it really does have to do with our lenses, like what frames we're wearing. And that's why I took that picture with like all the lenses inspired by John Lennon, because it has to do with this right here, our lenses. How are we viewing these behaviors? What lens are we going to wear? And how are we going to respond? If we respond as if like behaviors are intentional, just really hard to watch. It's really hard to watch. It's really hard to witness that, right? But the change is going to happen in the adult, not the child. I think that's the biggest reframe.
Yeah, I like what you said. So I'm going to mention it again. You said it's the environment that is maladaptive, not the child. So I think if any educator is working with a child and they're experiencing like challenging behaviors, you need to look at like what's happening in the environment to make these adaptive survival responses in the child like happen, right? Is that basically what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, exactly. It's the environment. And this is the paradigm shift. This reframe right here, viewing the behaviors as an adaptive survival response, not a maladaptive behavior. And how can we make the environment and others feel safe for this child, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting. But it makes sense. So, what
Yeah.
do we have to do to help a child co regulate and show safety in our presence?
Okay, I have a couple things here. And so the first and foremost is that Dr. Stephen Porges says that co-regulation, and I have to add sensational in there, connection, but sensational connection are our biological imperatives as human beings. Like, I mean, that's like, okay, let's do this, right? Like, this is our biological imperative. And so Deb Dana, I mentioned this before, she says that we have to have just a toe dipped in ventral because we also have our own nervous system. We also have our own surveillance, like detecting danger and safety throughout our day at a subconscious level, right? And so we just need to have one toe dipped. It's not about being fully calm. It's
Mhm.
that's not what regulation is about, right? It's about having the flexibility in the autonomic nervous system and just having enough ventral energy so that those hybrid states, so that the child could then borrow our ventral energy. And I honestly, I've been a mom for 7 years. I had a misconception of what regulation was. And I actually gave myself a hard time for not being calm, right,
Mhm.
all the time. And so just learning that it's not, regulation does not mean calm, right, took a lot of pressure off of my shoulders and the way that I showed up. So just a tone. And
I'm sorry
yeah,
to interrupt you there, but if it's not like calm, can you give some examples of what it is? Like, I know you had like some examples in that graphic, but like realistic, what could that look like? What did you start doing if it didn't mean like calm?
yeah, okay. So I'm going to show you an example because
Okay.
I'm a highly sensitive person. My son is a highly sensitive person. So we're very attuned to, um, we're going to talk about implicit communication later, but we're
Okay.
very attuned to the other person's facial expressions, body gestures, right? Everything that doesn't include words.
Mhm.
And so I was like putting his shoes on. We were late to school. So this is where like my anxiety starts, you know,
Yeah. When we
just,
run late, I'm like,
yeah,
just not my favorite person.
yeah, yeah. So I'm there like trying to be calm. Really, I call it a mask of calm,
Hmm.
right? Because I'm like my face, and this is what polyvagal communication is all about. It's like not only the words, like I wasn't yelling, I wasn't, like explicitly, nothing was coming out as if I was angry, but I was masking how my autonomic nervous system, so my face was showing something else, right?
Hmm.
And a highly attuned child will read through the mask of calm. And so he's like, Mama, are you mad at me? Are you mad?
My daughter says the same thing.
So I'm like, okay. And if I were to have looked at myself in the mirror, I probably had something going on in my eyebrows,
Mhm.
right? Like I was trying to portray calm, right? Or regulation, but that's what it's all about. Like I said, no, I'm not angry. I am feeling anxiety right now because we're late, but it's not your fault,
Mhm.
So, and it's like the sock situation is never right. So we spend a lot of time getting dressed, and this is why sensational connections comes in, because it's like our entire sensory system and nervous system is at par, right? Like, so I told him, I'm feeling a lot of anxiety right now and I'm not mad. So right now, actually my heart rate is going really fast, and this is where the autonomic nervous system, like the polyvagal communication, could come in. And I really need to bring it back down. So I'm going to take some deep breaths so that I can bring my heart rate down. I don't know if that answers, but it's like I wasn't sympathetic. I wasn't sympathetic. I wasn't yelling, I wasn't portraying anger, but my face and the upper part of our face is portraying what's happening in our physiological. So it's
Mhm.
really cool, like, to become aware, what is my face doing? If I'm doing this, like, of course he's going to perceive anger, but I wasn't matching up my face and my communication. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Yeah.
So it's like Lisa Dion, she's a play therapist, and she talks about like what is not said could also cause trauma,
Mm.
right? So it's like being just fully authentic and sharing, like, yeah, actually, I'm feeling a little bit anxious right now, but it's not your responsibility. Like, it has nothing to do with you. We're going to be late today. And
Mhm.
that's okay, right? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so, like, given that example, what state do you think that you were in? If we were to go back.
I wasn't sympathetic.
You were in sympathetic.
Yeah, I wasn't sympathetic.
Okay.
I was super anxious that we were late.
Okay.
And I wasn't in fight, or I wasn't mobilizing. So
Okay.
I was trying to share my ventral, which
Mhm.
I was, because I wasn't essentially in fight or flight. So it was like a hybrid, but
Okay.
my face, and this is why I'm like so passionate about sharing like what polyvagal communication is, because my face was not showing social engagement like
Mm.
for ventral.
Mhm.
That makes sense.
Mhm.
it's
Yep.
it's a practice. It's a practice. This is not going to happen overnight. We are human too, but I think the awareness and the shift in lenses is how we're going to actually make some change out there.
Yeah. No, I think understanding, like, the why,
Yeah,
and like you said, I don't think anybody is gonna walk away from this and be like, "Oh, I'm an expert in polyvagal theory
yeah,
now." But they know what it is. They know how it applies to behaviors and what we actually need to be looking at instead, and then they have this visual to reference whenever they're trying to see, like, practice. What
yeah.
does the ventral look like? What does the sympathetic look like? What does the dorsal look like? Okay, what state am I in right now? And how can I help this child co-regulate? Makes sense.
Exactly, exactly. And so feeling that felt sense of safety needs to be felt within it, in our body, in our environment, and between two nervous systems, right? So feeling that like comprehensive felt sense of safety. And so this is, I mean, I'm quoting Deb Dana and Stephen Porges like throughout this whole, I have the references at the end, but I just love the way that Stephen Porges talks about this neural connection between face and heart. Right. That's what I was talking about right now. Like my voice was portraying one thing, my face was portraying another thing. It just didn't match. And
Mhm.
so that was confusing for my son. So it provides a portal through which neuroregulation of physiological states can be exercised through social engagement and vocal prosody. And so, in other words, our warm facial connection, right? Our receptive posture, our open heart, and listening presence helps our communication partner to feel safe and further facilitate a neural connection of their physiology. So my son, like, he couldn't figure it out. He's like, "Am I safe? Is she mad at me? Like, what's
Mhm.
going on here?" Right? Like, he didn't feel safe, even though I wasn't yelling. There was nothing, like fight or flight about it, but he was attuned enough to my nervous system, and
Mhm.
that's the cool part.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that example because it does help to illustrate, like, where you might be in these states and how, like, you can help co-regulate with a child.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit more about like what implicit communication is versus explicit
Yeah.
communication.
So I've just been like diving into this topic for about 2 years now. And so this is what I'm coming up with to explain that it's not just our words, right? There's so much more to communication. So I'm calling it polyvagal communication. And Dr. Porges talks about face-to-face connection, which I'm referring to as implicit communication, and then the face-to-heart connection, which we just talked about, which I'm referring to as explicit communication. So what is the implicit part of polyvagal communication is our facial expressions. Our physiological state is broadcasted in the upper part of our face, which I thought was super cool.
Mm.
So I have wanted to do Botox, right? For my 11, but I haven't. So I have this 11 going on, and it's like it's broadcasting what's going on in my physiology. So for like those who do Botox and it's not there, right? So this could get kind of confusing for children too.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean,
Yeah,
I do it. This is a newer thing for me, but
I
it
want to
is
do
funny
it.
like watching like because I have a very deep and I just felt like I looked so angry all the time because of the very I could show you old pictures. When I watch like let's just say reality shows and it doesn't move at all or and they're crying, it's very confusing, right? Like because you wonder, are they being real? Are they really sincere with their emotion right now? But that does play a big part, believe it or not. And
Yeah,
now that you're confirming that the physiological state is like
nice.
referenced here, that's really fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. And so there's a conversation with Dr. Stephen Porges and Peter Levine, who is the developer of Somatic Experiencing, and they talk about this, how the more Botox is being, done, the the less children are able to fully, I guess, interpret, right? What
Mm,
the communication partner is truly feeling. And so I brought that up because I do have the 11, and it's just something that it's like, okay, now that I could just work on relaxing it a little bit more, maybe like doing some tapping because I don't know. I don't know. But yeah, so I just put this in chart form. We kind of already talked about this, but just like our body positioning, right? Like, are we listening with an open heart, our gestures, and our own felt sense of safety, right? Like our own interoception and neuroception, what we're detecting in ourselves. And then we'll be able to use our external, our explicit communication for that face to heart connection. Like, is what we're saying matching our physiological state? Um, and that's why I've also like dived into the whole like being authentic, right? Because there is healthy anger. Like
mhm,
these we are it's our biological imperative. It's not to suppress our sympathetic. We kind of need that sometimes too. So,
mhm,
but it's just a matter of like our words, like I put declarative language here, which we're not going to get into, but that would be like our harmony, right? And our prosody would be like our melody of what we're broadcasting at our autonomic state is our prosody. And so our own melody, our own tune, our tone of voice, right? And our own somatic profile, our heart rate, breathing patterns. So a lot is going on, but we're all speech language pathologists, but when you break it down to like the nonverbal communication, like there's a lot going on. There's a lot being communicated, right? Without words. And
mhm.
I think that's what attunement is, which is a part. That's what I call sensational connection. It's attunement, right? Being attuned to your communication partner with what is not being said. So it's nervous system to nervous system.
So I have a couple of things I want to say about this. I'm reading or listening to the book, The Anxious Generation. Are you familiar with it?
Oh no, I should read it though.
Yeah, and it basically talks about the rise in depression and anxiety in children and teens due to the introduction of social media. But I imagine that social media plays a big part in this too, because you're not necessarily getting as much of implicit or explicit communication. There's probably a third facet to this, which is written, maybe? I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah. Yeah.
Very interesting. And then another like thing I wanted to say is, the concept of mirror neurons, right? With baby
Hmm.
mirroring their parents. We were just like talking about that Botox scenario again. Like my dad also has very deep. So maybe there's like, I don't know, correlation and causation, but maybe like because my dad had these strong facial expressions, I mirrored that as a child and learned that. I'm not sure. It would be interesting to see like if there is a correlation between those two things where like a child does use more of those type of facial expressions because their parents did. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean? If your
yeah.
parents have like the deep
They
11,
actually do. They
yeah.
actually do.
I
Yeah,
think
they
it
do.
also could be cultural. Like my dad's side is Italian, so very
Very
expressive.
expensive. Same as
Yeah.
same as the, Cuban, like
Yeah.
Hispanic background too. So the mirror neurons, I actually didn't put in here, but that's essentially what is happening in co-regulation, right? As
Okay.
as an external regulator, which is Lisa Dion's, she coined that term. And she's great. She's great. I've learned a lot from her course. And so it's like if we're the external regulator, if you think of it
Mhm.
in that way, yes, essentially we want them to mirror our right.
Okay.
So yeah, mirror neurons are definitely very, very, very important for co-regulation since we are the external regulator. And when she put it in that way, right, I was
Mhm.
like, oh yeah, because yeah, they can self-regulate. We have to co-regulate first, but like we are the external regulator. Like I don't know, it just that word it really was an aha moment for me,
Mhm.
you
I
know?
like the way Dr. Becky kind of puts this into perspective. She talks about, if anybody knows Dr. Becky or
Yeah,
follows
yeah.
her, let us know in the chat, but I love her.
Yeah.
And she talks about the adult figure being like a pilot on a plane. And you want to show that you have control of the plane, that you're providing safety and that they can trust you. If you're an adult and you're erratic and you're like moving the plane like left to right and that you're hitting a storm and you're a little unsure of how to handle it, that's going to make the people on the plane very uneasy. So I think, when you think of it in that terms, like the adult being the pilot, being that external regulator,
Yeah.
then you want to just, make sure that you're in a controlled state, I guess, or like that. What did you call it? The ventral state.
Hybrid. Yeah, yeah. It would probably be hybrid though, because the pilot's probably like, like still feeling
Yeah,
sympathetic,
that's true.
but
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
but like having just that toe dipped in ventral. Yeah, you're right. Ventral.
That
I
makes sense. And that's such a good way to explain it too, because you're right. Like the pilot is also going to be feeling anxious and a little
yeah.
fearful, like unless maybe they know exactly what's going on and exactly how to fix it. But if they're a little unsure, then they're probably in that hybrid state. That's a great point.
Yeah. Awesome.
Um, all right, so let's move on to the seven principles of the science of safety.
Yeah, so I have this book here. This book just recently came out. And so I was going through it as I was preparing my slides, and I was like, oh, yeah, I'm going to add that. So he has this beautiful chart, and he calls it the seven principles of a science of safety. He has this beautifully written out. Like, so the first principle is feelings of safety are a subjective interpretation of a calm autonomic state regulated by the ventrovagal pathway that suppose homeostatic functions, so our health, growth, and restoration. So it is subjective to that person. And I think that's really important for us to know because
Yeah.
what feels safe for me is not going to feel safe for you.
Hmm.
Um, and then if it's unsafe for them, like our lenses, just viewing it with compassion and not judgment or shame, right? I think
Mhm.
that's also very important. So feelings of threat, stress, or anxiety are subjective interpretations of a shared defensive autonomic state that disrupts our homeostasis, right? Function. Feelings of safety provide access to the social engagement, right? If we feel unsafe, we're automatically going to go into sympathetic, fight or flight, right? Or dorsal, which is like freeze, fawn. So we have to feel safe in order to access our higher level thinking for social engagement and communication. So I'm going to go over here to number 5, just because
Okay.
the way that I had to word it to fit properly. So, when recruited, the social engagement system sends signals of safety, right? So, through our intonation of voice, facial expressions, to others that functionally downregulate, right? So, our neuroception, autonomic states of defense, right? To states of calmness and accessibility, mitigating the metabolically
The big one, yeah.
costly threat reactions through co-regulation, right? So it's just, I'm laughing because Dr. Stephen Porges talks about how like he writes his books and like no one could understand what he says. But I am writing it word for word. So I'm trying to like also just change the wording for us in a way where we could understand. So when he says downregulate, we're going down to the survival because before it was a ladder. So it was like up and down. And so when he says downregulate means that we're going down to the survival responses. And so when he says upregulate, it's going back up to ventral. So that's what that means. And then the autonomic states of calmness, so feelings of safety, enable efficient access to the higher brain structures involved in problem solving and creativity. And I'm going to add executive functioning in there. I'm going to add communication skills in there since we're speech therapists. And so if they're in a survival state, right, they're in the brainstem. They're in the brainstem and the midbrain. We are not able to access communication when we're in a survival state. So that's where our lenses come in, like, oh, okay. Let's help them upregulate to ventral so that they can access communication. And that's where co-regulation comes in. So the reciprocal benefits of co-regulation form the basis of socialization and supports the neural systems of optimizing health and performance, which is our social engagement system. And then last, he says co-regulation provides the neural state that supports the establishment of trusting relationships and safety and connection. So those are his 7 principles of a science of safety, which he's just a genius.
Yeah. This is, it's definitely, I think, a lot of information, but I think we can try to break this down and show how you can like use these in therapy. I know we have more to talk about too, so I might come back to this one too, but it is really informative. So
Yeah,
yes, here's your
definitely.
strategies.
I did add that later because I was like, even if we didn't get to it today, like at least it would be in the slides because I did try to put more like examples that we could use in the therapy room here in the next 2 slides.
Perfect. Awesome.
So strategies to promote safety and connection. We talked about this. So the most important strategy is shifting our own lenses, right, on how we view children's behaviors. And this shift in lenses is imperative for the paradigm shift. And I put how through neuroplasticity
Okay.
because it's possible the way that we think, our thought process, the way that we view things, right? It is possible for change through neuroplasticity. And, over time, repetition and repetition will create new synapses to then when we see something, we're going to just be able to respond differently the more and more we practice this shift in our lenses. And so attunement or sensational connection is the main concept of co-regulation. So we've been talking about how being attuned to another person's nervous system is what co-regulation is all about. And it's the ability to sense what another is feeling and experiencing, but not through words, through body sensations and felt sense. And so if we think about our environment, right? Because we talked about how, you know, sometimes the maladaptive behaviors are because they're they're in a maladaptive environment, or what their nervous system is detecting as as unsafe. And so we have our power in how we create our environment, right? Like stimulating all of the senses, making sure that it's welcoming for their nervous system. So the scent, the lights, the sound. Is it too cold? Do they have an invitation to move? Like, we have control of this. My lights are always off. I have frequencies on. I wish I could have a candle, but I can't in the school. But having blankets if it's too cold, and having space to move, adaptive seating, all of these things is how we could have our environment be safe and welcoming for them. I always like to do kind of like a dance party followed by breathing, so that they could notice their interoception skills, right? Like their autonomic state, their physiological state. So like they'll have an increase in heart rate, right? So we'll stop and notice after we dance, and we'll talk about how our heart rate is now going faster. And then we'll do breathing exercises. We'll do our hands, we'll smell the flowers, we'll blow the candles. And when we change our breathing, we change our state. And that's super cool. And it's a fun way to become aware of their autonomic nervous system. And so awareness of state, like through curiosity, through compassion, educating, right? And play. And so that's we like all the kids are like, all right, I'm ready for my dance party. And then they know they're all standing there with their hands ready, and we're going smelling the flowers, blowing the candles. And it's just great. So I'll ask, how is your heart rate going? Is it going too fast? Is it going too slow? Or is it going just right? And they'll all say just right, and it's just fun. It's a fun way of noticing, right? Their nervous system.
That's great.
And so we practice it when they're regulated. So when they become dysregulated, they'll be able, okay, smell the flowers. I have flowers. They're over there. I have like lavender oil on it. And so we smell it, and then we blow the candle. And like I have this little like the jack-o'-lantern candle,
Mhm.
and it's just a fun way of noticing without it being like a demand, like take a deep breath, It if they smell the lavender, they like automatically smell it without it being like a demand of deep breathing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then not labeling the behaviors and the emotions as bad, right? Like being with them. That's what co-regulation is. It's a way of being. It's not doing, it's being with, right?
Mhm.
Just knowing that children will do good if they can. And that's Ross Greene's The Explosive Child and his work. If they can.
Mhm. That's a
So,
great point. Yep.
yeah.
Great reminder.
And so let's see what I have over here. Yeah. So it's our job as external co-regulators to help our client feel the felt sense of safety in their body, in their environment, and between two nervous systems. And I call this the duet of polyvagal communication and safe regulation,
Okay.
because it's a duet. There's so many things happening at the same time. It's multidimensional, right?
Mhm.
So co-regulators create sensational connection and attunement. I kind of break this up in the next slide,
Okay.
just the analogies just to better understand. And so it's like the melody, the harmony, and the rhythm. In a duet, you need two people.
Mhm.
And in a duet, there are multiple parts, right? So we have to be attuned to our own nervous system, right? And so we have to retune our own inner melody
Mhm.
before we are able to harmonize with our communication partner.
Mhm.
Like we can't offer ventral, we can't offer a harmony to the communication partner's melody if our own melody is if there's dissonance in our own melody, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So, yeah, there's not only two people, there's two nervous systems, but there's also multidimensional communication going on in what we're trying to offer them as external regulators. Our implicit communication, our explicit communication, but also like what is going on within ourselves, right? In
Mhm.
order to show up. And so once we have our solid, pleasant melody, we are then able to create harmony with our communication partner, and it becomes a duet. But also, we have a duet with the regulation, the rhythm, right, of the song. We could have a melody solid and then like the rhythm is like off, like there's still dissonance. So we have to maintain a solid rhythm of co-regulation throughout the duet.
Mhm.
And that's our job too. Is that I don't know. I came up with this analogy because it's hard. There's a lot of things going on. Um it's not just our lenses, right? There's so much more.
Yeah, no, I love like how you took your music background and you applied it to your speech background and to the polyvagal theory. I love how your brain works, Jackie. But it's awesome. I think for anybody that is like very familiar with music, it's going to make a lot of sense, but I like the harmony piece of this. And I think, you giving examples of how like you guilted yourself a lot like in the beginning because you thought that co-regulation meant like being calm, just something for everybody watching this to remember that like it can be hard to co-regulate sometimes, like especially if your inner melody or your polyvagal state is like not at an optimal place. And it, like you said, I think it takes practice.
100% practice. And now I look at it like a moment of dysregulation. I look at it as okay, cool. I'm going to put like my football, paint on my face, and I'm going to practice. It's another opportunity to practice my hybrid state. And one thing that Deb Dana says as a therapist, she says, if we don't have a toe dipped in ventral, cancel your appointment, cancel the session.
Mhm,
Because if we are not able to share that, like not even a toe dipped in ventral, then what happens, like what happened to my son, then their nervous system creates their own narrative and their own story. And guess what happens? Then we start losing that trust because that nervous system is saying, oh, I made her upset, right?
mhm,
Oh, it's my fault, right? And so that's why I had to reassure my son, like, that's not the story. The story that's going on in your nervous system is not the story to my state.
mhm,
Because otherwise, then that's when that negative dialogue, even at an early age in our children, starts that narrative, that story starts forming. And it will always be a negative one because in a parent child dyad, if it's not like it's not going to be the parents' fault. They're always going to say, oh, it's my fault, right? In order to have that attachment. So same thing in a therapist and child, client relationship, their story, their nervous system is going to create their own story. And then maybe the next time they come, they're not going to feel like that safety as they
mhm.
once did. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
cancel the session. Cancel the session if you're just not able to dip a toe in ventral. That's what I'm recommending. Anyway.
Well, let's keep it like real on here because that's what we do on the podcast. And I'm glad that you work in a school setting
Yeah.
because you can actually relate to this. Is it realistic that, or is it like safe to say that a lot of therapists, just given the environment that they're in, could be in like what is it, sympathetic
Yeah.
state a lot of the time?
Okay. I'm glad you brought up the school system.
I think it's important because I remember feeling that way.
I I'm glad you brought that up because it was my first year last year in the school system after being in the medical model for 8 years. And I wasn't sympathetic. I wasn't sympathetic every time I went into the SVE classroom. I wasn't sympathetic every time I witnessed a dialogue with the teacher, the expectation being too high with the student.
Mhm,
And it was really hard for me to um, just be there,
mhm,
really, you know? And so I said, okay, what can I control? I cannot change the education system.
mhm.
I
Yeah,
really wanted to. I was fighting and educating and
I
advocating.
remember. Yeah, I remember you
And
telling me
it was really getting to my nervous system in a way where I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm in sympathetic. Like, and no one wants to listen. Not everyone is going to be ready to hear what we have to say for this paradigm shift. And I think that's the hardest part. But I also think that staying quiet is just not going to change anything.
that. Mhm,
So feeling confident enough and learning how to meet the teachers where they are in a way where, like, okay, I'm still advocating, but I also need to have this relationship with this teacher, right? They've been there for 25 plus years. Like, how can we meet halfway? But me educating is the way that and that's sympathetic, right? When you
Mhm.
advocate, that's sympathetic energy, like the safe one, not
Mhm.
the unsafe one. But so you learn how you can still advocate in an environment that is, I mean, maladaptive. But
Mhm.
then I went ahead and created my classroom in a way where that was welcoming.
You
So
did.
so
Yeah.
pulling out the students into my classroom, I know that for those 30 minutes, I'm no longer in sympathetic and neither are they.
Mhm.
So I don't know, you learn the goal, the polyvagal theory, the goal is to have a flexible autonomic nervous system,
Mhm.
to be flexible. So I'm able to practice that flexibility, if you will,
Yeah,
in
I think what
the
you're
class.
saying is like a really like good place for maybe therapists to start, like at least school-based therapists specifically, but any like even in private practice is like if you can't control the environment outside of your therapy room, like starting with your therapy room and like trying to make that not maladaptive, to make it adaptive and a safe place for your students. And so maybe like pulling out is a good place to start. I did all in like pretty much all like push in. I know that's not the ideal word, but that could have been like what contributed to that state for most of the time. So think that's a really great tip.
Yeah, I if I didn't have my own classroom, that would have been that would have been really challenging for me,
Yeah.
because then I wouldn't feel effective because I know what my heart
Mhm.
has, like it just didn't align. It wouldn't align with my heart if I wasn't able to really, really co-regulate in a safe environment for them. And
Mhm.
then just those 30 minutes, believe it or not, are going to be super effective to, like, let's say their sensory cup is like about to spill and they're about to have a meltdown. But if I could bring them to my sensory room and
Mhm.
kind of recharge, right?
Mhm.
Then we're spilling some of the water out of the cup and then they'll have the capacity to practice their flexibility in that like
Mhm.
maladaptive environment. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
So we we do make an impact even in those 30 minutes. That's how I see it.
Mm. You know what this reminds me of? Like reading the room. Like
Mhm.
read the environment, like, when you're connect like this is what this whole conference is about is like read what state your client is in before you like jump into the session. Like figure out which like part of like which autonomic nervous system, I'm trying to get all these terms right, like that they're in and where we want to try to get them to.
So I have a lot of resources here. Lori, I always say her last name wrong, Desatel. So she
Mhm.
has a book, Connections Over Compliance. She also has a book about intentional neuroplasticity,
Okay.
which is really great. But she just came out with a third book called Brain Over Brilliance. And she has like a workbook that she has for the children to say, okay, what state are you in right now? What state are you in right now? Just bringing that awareness to their states. And so, yeah, I work on language 20% of the time. I
Mhm.
work on self esteem and regulation 80% of the time with my middle schoolers. And that's okay because if they can't access communication and they can't learn, they can't communicate. So working, you know, helping them upregulate, right? Then we could access communication if they're regulated, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so where can everybody find and connect with you?
Right. So that's my Instagram, create yourself co, my email address. And I do have this landing page, Behavior Connect, for anyone who wants to get like freebies. I have like the smell the flowers, blow the candles, like a little freebie that I made that I could give out, and also the polyvagal ladder. So that's like the other way. It's not there, but it's just it's the ladder version of it that I made. So yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Jackie. I love
You.
like that we had one totally separate topic the last time you came on,
No.
which was about parent coaching. And that was for like running a like business as a parent coach, right? For SLP Creative Con last year. Yeah, last year.
You know,
So I love that you've like been really diving into this topic. And I think it is like so important for our field. So
it's
thanks for
so
coming
important.
in.
I think without the coaching part, I wouldn't be able to communicate with the teachers as well. You know what I
That's,
mean?
yeah.
Like just reading the room. Yeah.
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 So it's just it's all relative. So thank you, Vanita. We did such good timing.
Yeah, we did. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you.